So Resident Evil 4 Remake is the next big thing people are speculating will be announced by Capcom in terms of Resident Evil once they wrap up everything with Village and its DLC. So with that, I thought I'd make a list of 5 things that I would like to see in a potential remake should it actually happen. And none of these are in any sort of particular order. I'm just going to kind of go through them how I listed them. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, so for the first thing, I would like to see the Mercenaries mode get expanded on. You know, in the original version, you only have 4 maps and 5 characters to select from, so I would really love to see that become something more. They could definitely add more maps. That wouldn't be really an issue. You know, they could create unique maps that aren't really from any of the actual areas of the game, similar to how Waterworld in the original game wasn't in the main game. That was a map specifically designed for Mercenaries mode. It just had the setting theme to the island. So they could do that where they're just creating unique maps for Mercenaries mode specifically, but they carry over the themes of the village, the castle, and the island. And that would give us more maps and make for more replay value, because it does get a little stale playing the same 4 maps in the RE4 Mercenaries. Another thing that I would like to see is the characters get some sort of customization where you could earn enough points to purchase different weapons for the characters and switch up their weapons rather than they just have whatever weapon they have to begin with. Like, for example, Krauser, his set is that bow gun. That's all he gets. Hunk only gets a TMP. Leon gets just the shotgun and a handgun. It'd be cool if you could kind of switch around the different types of weapons for each character and just give them different customizations to your liking. I think that'd be kind of cool if they did that. Another thing, speaking of characters, is to add Luis Serra to Mercenaries mode. I really don't understand why he was not in the original RE4 Mercenaries. I don't get why they didn't do that, yet Hunk is in it and he's not even in the game at all outside of Mercenaries mode. So I would have definitely loved to have seen Luis in there, and you could even go a step further and add characters like Sherry and Claire to have like a Resident Evil 2 throwback with the whole cast there, because I believe 5 did something similar where you had Rebecca and Barry in that Mercenaries mode, kind of giving you a throwback to Remake in a way. So I think that'd be really cool if they did something like that to give you more characters, which would also increase the fun of the mode. And then the last thing for Mercenaries mode I would love to see is bring in a co-op online mode where you can play with friends online and enjoy that, because that was one of the funnest things about Resident Evil 6's Mercenaries, was the ability to play online if you wanted to. And so I think they should do that. Sure, the main game is a solo experience, but that doesn't mean that Mercenaries has to be a solo experience. They could implement co-op abilities for that, and that would just give it that much more appeal if they did that. So those are a list of the things I would like to see Mercenaries mode increase on, and I think it would be really good if they did that. So there you go for that. Let's go ahead and move on to the next thing. So the next thing I want to talk about is I would love to see the Separate Ways bonus game go from the bonus game to full-length campaign. I think this would be really good because it would allow for more to be shown within that campaign. You know, I love the original, but because it was so short, it was kind of choppy and left us with some questions still. For example, I always kind of wondered, how did she originally arrive at the village? You know, when the game first starts, she's already automatically there. We don't really get that introduction to how she got there. Whereas with Leon, we see him ride there with 2 officers to the village. So we get to see how Leon gets there, but Ada, it's kind of left in question how she actually shows up. Another example is during the last segment of the village portion, she's outside the cabin talking to Luis, and then when that chapter ends, the very next chapter, she's already inside the castle, and it's the cutscene when she meets Leon in the castle. There's no introduction as to how she got to the castle. Did she go through the door that Leon goes through? Did she grapple her way over there? How'd she get there? What was she doing before she met Leon within the castle? Like, these are the kind of questions I would love to see get answered, and the way you do that is you make Separate Ways a full campaign the same size as the main campaign with Leon. And so I would love to see all that. And then on top of that, you could do creative things like giving her her own unique boss fights outside of just fighting Krauser again and fighting the humanoid Saddler. You could give her her own creature that she exclusively fights. I think that'd be really cool to see. So I would absolutely love to see Separate Ways become a full-length campaign. So let's go ahead and move on to the next thing. Up next is, I would love to see the main 3 areas that you explore get expanded on and have more to them. You know, particularly this is for the island segment, because as I've said before, I feel as though it was a bit rushed how so much happens so quickly. You fight Krauser with the knife fight, and then you fight U3, and then you fight Krauser in the boss fight. Like, it's just so much happening all together that it just sort of felt rushed. So I'd love to see the island get increased in size to where all that kind of has separation. But I would also love to see the village and the castle get increased as well, because I love those areas, and so to be able to spend a little more time in them would be great. So I think expanding on the locations and increasing the playtime of the game would be a huge bonus if they could do that. So definitely something I want to see, and hopefully it is something that will come forth if they do end up remaking Resident Evil 4. Let's go ahead and move on to the next topic. Alright, so the next thing that I'd like to see in a potential Resident Evil 4 remake is to have Luis Serra get a playable moment in the game. Now they could do this one of 2 ways. They could either give him a mini campaign similar to Separate Ways, where we see what he does during the village segment and the early portion of the castle and have that go on, or they could give him a single moment within the main game where he becomes playable, similar to how Ashley had a moment in the main game where she was playable. And I think this is probably the better direction to take it, and I think the perfect moment for it would be the early part of the castle when he goes back to get the sample and the medication for Leon and Ashley. I think that would be a great moment to have him become playable. We backtrack as Luis Serra, looking for the sample, looking for the medication, and then as soon as we find it, it cuts back to Leon and Ashley as they pursue the castle. I would love to see something like that happen. Just give him some sort of spotlight for a moment before his ultimate demise, and I think it'd be really cool. So that's something I'd like to see added in Resident Evil 4 Remake, should it happen. Let's go ahead and move on to the next thing. So for this final thing that I would like to see implemented in a potential Resident Evil 4 remake would be to have a few more horror aspects throughout the game. Obviously, action would still need to be the core component, because that's what made Resident Evil 4 so appealing and fun. Plus, Leon is more experienced and has more skill, so you'd want to capitalize on all of that. But I do think some more horror would be a good thing for the game, and there's many ways that they could implement it. For one, many people have suggested that Chief Mendez in the village portion could play more of a pursuer role throughout. Now, I do think this is a good idea, but I think it would be better if it was towards the end of the village rather than the entire village. Have it be he pursues Leon at the end or near the end after seeing how big of a nuisance Leon truly is and decides to take matters in his own hands. I think that could potentially work. Another thing would be the Vertigo in the castle. You could extend his time in the lower levels of the castle, and that could bring in a bit more horror for the castle portion, going against Vertigo for a longer extended period. And then with the village, there's plenty there. You have the Regenerators, which were like the creepiest enemy in Resident Evil 4. You could capitalize on that by giving them more eerie settings. Have the environments be darker. Give it, eerie music and flickering lights and things like that to really intensify the whole feeling of the Regenerators. And then the U3 boss fight, you could also make a lot more terrifying. When you're going through those little maze chambers, you could just intensify that a lot more and bring forth the horror there. So I think those things could definitely add to the horror element. But on top of that, the plaga that is inside of Leon's body could also be used for like a psychological element for horror, where he's going from human to Ganado and he starts to hallucinate certain things, and that brings forth a new type of horror within his mind. And so I think that would be pretty cool, because honestly, The plaga that he gets injected with is sort of underutilized in the game. It never really does anything. He has a few cutscenes where Sadler gives him cramps because of it, or he throws up blood, but aside from that, it really doesn't play a huge factor in the game. So I think adding a psychological horror element to it would give it a lot more potential, and I would love to see that. But those are the 5 things that I would love to see in a potential RE4 remake. These obviously aren't the only 5 things that they could change or add or whatever. There's plenty of other things, but these are the 5 things that sort of came to my mind when thinking about it, and I wanted to make a video on it. But I'll go ahead and end this video here. If you have your own thoughts on what you would like to see in an RE4 remake, go ahead and comment what your thoughts on that would be. I'll end it here, and I will see you all on the next one. See you then.